Yeah, so I only hesitate because anytime bidding is brought up specifically, it almost has to be in the context of your cost per click as a function of your bid and the value per click. And
Mm-hmm.
VPC is not a metric that most people use in every single report. And yet, if you think about it, if you need to make, say a 5x ROAS or 500% ROAS or however you want to,
So
you need to
let's
make
define
$5.
ROAS really quickly for people who are
Sure.
listening, return on ad spend.
Yeah, return on ad spend. So the idea being, if I spend $1, I need to see $5 in revenue. That's saying that your target is a return on ad spend of a multiple of 5.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of problems with ROAS as a metric. It's really, really common. Everybody knows it. In some term or another, ROI is comparable, if slightly different definition. But the issue is not that people can't decide whether it's a multiplier, a dollar value, or a percent, which is also true. It's also not useful. Like you have to take it into its reciprocal before you can actually use it for anything. So
Mm-hmm.
if I say I need a 5 to 1 ROAS, here's a budget of $20,000. Quick, how much revenue do you have to make? Well, you can't really control the revenue. That's an output,
Right,
not an input.
right,
And
right.
so to get from that output to that input, I use cost of sale, which in my vocabulary is the reciprocal of the return on ad spend. So instead of saying for every dollar I need $5 back, I say I only want to spend 20% of my revenue at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
the great thing about using a percent of revenue, like we use cost of sale, is that it can be directly compared to your margins. And if your average margin is 30% and you're spending 30% on your ads, you're already
Making
breaking
zero.
even.
Right.
Yeah, you're already running into trouble. And I think ROAS hides that to some degree. Just it obfuscates it. It's just kicking up dust. So once you
Right.
have that cost of sale and you have your value per click, all of a sudden something magical happens, and that is your value per click times your cost of sale is your target bid. Whatever magic bidding system you have, whether it's mine or you're doing it by hand or you're using Google's built-in systems or a third party or anything, that is the goal, is to produce that target CPC as your final actual CPC. And the only reason you don't just enter that number in and walk away is because of the volatility of the auction. You don't know what your actual CPC is going to be based on a $1 bid. So if you want to be spending a dollar, you might be bidding $1.10, $1.20, $5,
Right.
and so that's where the cleverness of good bidding systems come in to some degree, and that is a view that I find very concrete and satisfying and surprisingly uncommon in terms of the way people look at paid search.
And I think the keyword there which you used was obfuscate, right? Because it sounds like what you're doing with this cost of sale metric is to make it something that's easier to relate to, because you can
Yeah.
actually relate it to your own business metrics. Whereas, if I say 5 to 1, 3 to 1, 10 to 1 ROAS, it sounds great, but in relation to what? Because maybe your cost of sale is actually, I don't know, 80% for your goods and you only have a 20% margin. Well, then, 5 to 1 is not really going to cut it.
Yeah, and you see that a lot in anytime I see an interface that uses an intentionally weird way of representing ROAS, I'm
Hmm.
even more suspicious. Like if you log into Bing, one, revenue is not a default column, like
Hmm.
in the view. Like why would I have to add revenue to this view to make this useful? And then two, the instead of showing return on ad spend as a coefficient like Google does, they use not only a percent, but then they add 2 additional sig figs after the decimal point. So it'd be 500.00%. And if you're looking at a number and you're just quickly glancing at it and it says 110%, you're like, fantastic, 110% sounds great. But hold on, that's like
That's
spending
terrible.
48 or something percent of my, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But you added those extra zeros and the number looks big.
Right, right, right. I mean, it's almost like the advice here is like to avoid the snake oil, right? Like
Yeah.
it's like you've got all these metrics which could just easily make you very confused, but maybe if you can just link all of that to real business metrics that you are aware of, now you're suddenly able to make much better decisions whether the money you're spending is worth it or
Yeah, exactly right. And to some degree, everything is always going to be a balance between the granularity of control
Mhm.
and the statistical significance of the decisions you're making.
Sure.
One way to think about it is with date ranges. You know, if you're making a bid decision based on 1 week of data versus 6 weeks of data, the advantage of the shorter date range is that you can respond more quickly to changes in the market, but your certainty is much lower because the sample size is smaller. Same thing with granularity within the account. Some people still like to talk about, you know, specific individual keyword bids, and there are contexts where that conversation can still make sense. But this isn't 2012 anymore, and we should be looking at things in an appropriate level of granularity for the amount of data we have. And I think that's one of those challenges that's identical whether you're looking at a big company or a tiny startup. That specificity of bidding control is
Mhm.
an attractive lure, but the more you trace that specificity, the less and less statistically relevant your decisions are, and the more you're just sort of wading into a sea of noise.
That is such a critical point that I think it's just worth repeating because I think a lot of us really get really attracted by this idea that, you know, if you're doing an A/B test and this group is doing 40% more than better than the other one, you think, well,
Mhm.
right, that's clearly the one I should do. But if you don't look into the specificity of like why that happened, do I have enough data points to justify this? Is it statistically significant? Well, then you might go off on this completely incorrect tangent because of some wrong data. So I think the fact that data can lie to you is something very important to take away.
Yeah, well, I think that a lot of the day-to-day decisions that marketers are making, we forget that there are statistics going on under the hood, whether we acknowledge them and use them to our advantage or not.
Hmm.
And so people are getting better about the way they think about A/B tests in terms of significance. But if you're just going through your account and you're saying, okay, well, I have this VPC, I want to spend this percent of my revenue, and you're just generating those decisions, if if you don't acknowledge that the sample size and the difference in conversion rate or value per click um, both play into that significance, then you could be rolling the dice on smaller and smaller and smaller sample sizes, and that can cumulatively add up to just chaotic behavior of the account. And it wouldn't be obvious how to track that down because it would be coming from all directions simultaneously.